As all of you know, I studied law at the university. So I just want to share with you the reason why I chose to study law and my lifelong belief in the importance of the rule of law, both within nations and between and among nations. I wanted to study law because I wanted to use law to render justice in the world. I wanted to use law to defend the weak against the strong, the women against the male oppressor, to defend the voiceless against those who are powerful. So to me, the reason why I wanted to study the law had nothing to do with making money. It has everything to do with building a more equal and a more just society. Why do I think the rule of law is important? The rule of law is one of the most important achievements of Singapore. In Singapore, we can truly say no person is above the law, and no political party is above the law. Everyone is equal before the law. In many countries, not just in Asia, but in the world, if you are rich and powerful, you are exempted from the rule of law. I'm happy to say, Dennis, that in Singapore, no one is exempted from the law. Now, I moved from the domestic arena to the international arena. We live in a very big world. In this big world, there are very big countries and very small countries. There are very rich countries and very poor countries. There are countries which are homogeneous and countries which are very heterogeneous. So we live in a world of great diversity. So the question that people have often asked me is it possible in such a world to have a rule of law? That all countries, big or small, are subject to the same laws, principles, and rules. And there are many skeptical people who say there's no such thing as a rule of law. They will quote an ancient Chinese saying, 小国无外交. Small countries have no foreign policy. This suggests that it's a world ruled by might and not law. And if you're a small country, then you just have to come to terms with the reality that you live in a world ruled not by law, but by might. We have made some progress. And I would say 1945 was the turning point. In 1945, the Second World War ended. And due to the visionary leadership of the President of the United States of America, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he envisioned a post-Second World War world order based on principles and rules. He was the one who persuaded Churchill to establish the United Nations. The United States in 1945 was immensely powerful. Its economy represented half the economy of the world. The United States could have been a hegemon, and just rule the world through its sheer might. But no, Roosevelt and those who shared his vision wanted a different kind of world. They wanted to build a world which is governed by law. And this is why small countries like Singapore continue to say that we want to live in a rule-based world order and regional world order. We want to live in a world which is not without rules. We would want to rule in a world which resembles the jungle where the mighty prevail. So the ambition of Singapore and of ASEAN, the ASEAN country just held the 32nd summit in Singapore last week. And once more, in the chairman's statement and in the joint vision statement, they reaffirm that the ASEAN countries continue to uphold a rule-based international order and a rule-based regional order. We don't want the big and powerful country in this region to dictate to our small country. We don't want the big countries in this region to say that there are no rules. The only rule is power. And as we are the most powerful country, you small countries must comply with our wishes. That is not the kind of world we want. The rule of law is one of our precious achievements. Then the rule of law is important within countries, but it is also very important in a big world, that it should govern relations between countries, whether they're big or small.
You mentioned about the post-1945 Roosevelt's advocate for a rule-based world order, and it's now 2018, where we can say it's a global world where sometimes it's really, some people say there's no boundaries because of online, because of disruptions and so forth. So, how has the world changed?
The world order that was constructed after World War II was an order based upon the rule of law, open economies, free trade, international cooperation to achieve shared objectives. And the leader of the world that created this order was the United States of America. In a really almost unbelievable way, the current leader of the United States of America does not share Roosevelt's vision. And the rule-based order that we've enjoyed since 1945 is under challenge. Free trade is under challenge. Open economy is under challenge. Globalization is under challenge. International cooperation through multilateral institutions under challenge. People have short memories, and I keep reminding my American friends not to go down this road. I respectfully remind them that in the 1930s, the United States flirted with protectionism. The United States Congress enacted a law called the Smoot-Hawley Act, which imposed tariffs on imports. And of course, American trading partner reciprocated and imposed tariff on the American exports. And before you know it, we have a global trade war. And this contributed to the Great Depression that plunged the world economy into a decade-long recession. As PM said recently, even in these first few rounds of what could be a trade war, we have suffered collateral damage. Because solar panels exported from Singapore to the United States are subject to the tariffs that the president has imposed. And China has inexplicably designated exports of rubber from 3 countries as being subject to protectionist tariff. And we are one of the 3, So, we are a small, innocent party in this big game of the world. But when big countries engage in a trade war, small countries like us suffer collateral damage. So this is why I say it's a very dangerous moment in world history. And I appeal to my American friends to reflect on the wisdom of the path they're on. And I appeal to leaders in Asia and Europe to stand together to defend the world order which has made us strong and prosperous.
You mentioned that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was the principal architect of Singapore's foreign policy. And you mentioned some of the legacies during that time and what Mr. Lee himself believed in. And then, of course, later on you went on because you also served under Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong and then now Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. So I'd like to perhaps ask you what you see are the foreign policy principles and legacies under the 3 prime ministers, and what then do you see are also our challenges?
I've had the privilege of working under 3 prime ministers, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, and now Mr. Lee Hsien Loong. I think Singapore has been blessed. We have been blessed with good leaders. And I say this not because they pay my salary, But because I've always said that a country is either blessed or cursed at its founding. The United States was very lucky at the birth of the nation. In the 1770s, 70s, and 1780s, the United States had a group of remarkable founding fathers. They took turns to become President of the United States, Leader of the Opposition, Secretary of State, Treasury, and so on. In a smaller but similar way, Singapore was blessed that in 1965, when we suddenly became independent, we had this group of remarkable people who led Singapore through very troubled times. And the three individuals that really thought about how we can navigate this big world were Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, Dr. Goh Keng Swee, and Mr. Rajaratnam. And I had a great privilege of having worked with all three of them. But I also worked closely with Mr. Goh when he became our Prime Minister for 14 years. They are different in temperament. They have made different contributions to Singapore diplomacy because they were in charge of the country at different times in our history. You know, our agendas were different in the 1960s from when they were in the 1990s, from when they were in the 2000s, and going forward, it will be different again. So the time shaped the leader, but the leader also shapes the time. I think maybe one of the most important legacies of our founding Prime Minister was this. He decided when Singapore was poor, when we could have received generous support from other rich countries, he decided that Singapore would break ranks with other developing countries in that we will neither seek nor receive foreign aid. This is unusual and a brave decision to make, you know? But he was very wise to make that decision. Because when you accept foreign assistance from another country, you are beholden to that country. We didn't compromise our independence, even when we are poor. And so if a big country does something outrageous, we were not afraid to confront them, you know? People would say that Singapore is afraid of the big country. I say, no, our track record is that we are afraid of no one. We have always stood by our dignity. And we believe in the rule of law so much that if a big country violates that rule of law, we're willing to stand up to them. We maintain our dignity and our self-respect. And if a big country, no matter how good a friend it is to Singapore, does something that violates our fundamental national interests, we were prepared. We were prepared and we are prepared to stand up and say, sorry, you crossed the line.
Prof, in a world order where large nations or much bigger nations than ours could easily adopt a divide and rule a policy and seduce different small nations to behave in certain ways, what is your prognosis of the fate of small nations?
Well, yeah, we are lucky. We are lucky that the 10 countries that lived in Southeast Asia belong to a regional organization that works. In the early days of ASEAN, Indonesia could have acted as a spoiler, you know? Indonesia was the biggest country and is the biggest country in Southeast Asia. It is the natural leader of ASEAN. And yet, President Suharto, who's much maligned today, was a great statesman. He decided that Indonesia must act with forbearance, that Indonesia must curb its natural leadership position in order to allow the family to cohere. And in the Cambodian conflict, Indonesia was prepared to allow the Thais, Thailand, the frontline state, to dictate our policy. You know? Suharto did ASEAN a lot of good, and we must never forget that. Going forward, I confess to you, I'm worried. as the competition for influence between the United States and China grows in intensity, these two great powers will seek to divide the family. And some people would say the family is already divided. But at the recent 32nd ASEAN Summit in Singapore, the good news I want to share with you this evening is that all 10 leaders reaffirm that we must remain united. If we are not united, we cannot occupy the central role that we do in the regional architecture. If we are not united and we are not independent, then we can't play the role of the facilitator, convener, and honest broker, you know. I think most leaders of ASEAN understand this. My appeal to them is, please, if you align yourself with a great power, you may obtain some short-term gains. But in the process, you destroy ASEAN. And is it in your national interest to destroy ASEAN? When ASEAN was formed in 1967, our founding foreign minister, Mr. Rajaratnam, was a signatory to the Bangkok Declaration. And in a very important speech he made in 1967, the wisdom of which still applies today, he said, from this day forth, we, the five of us, there were five in the beginning, we have two loyalties. Loyalty to our own country and a loyalty to ASEAN. In whatever we do, we must not only consider our national interests, but we must also consider the regional interests. I think Raja's wisdom continued to prevail. And I often quote him just to remind the current generation ASEAN leaders that if you don't think about your national interests and the regional interests, and you only look after your national interests, then you may bring ruin to ASEAN.
Prof, many of the things you say, I guess many of our audience here, in a way, converts. They're here to listen to your, Singapore's achievements in foreign policy and so forth. But to the ordinary Singaporean, many of us out there may not appreciate why this is all important to us, why how we express our foreign policy, our intent, our principles are important, why the Convention of the Law of the Sea is important, why is the Earth Summit important. So because it's far away from the bread and butter issues that most people are concerned with. Yeah. How can we convince?
Okay, so let me try to convince you, and my wife also, that I didn't waste 10 years of my life helping to negotiate and to bring to a successful conclusion the UN Conference on the Law of the Sea. It took us 10 years. But in April 1982, when I was president of the conference, I brought the conference to a conclusion. And we adopted the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now, I want to now explain in very simple language why the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is important to all of us, ordinary Singaporeans. Why? Well, first, I remind you that 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water. The oceans occupy the majority of the surface of the Earth. And the oceans are very important to humanity's current interests and our future. Why? The oceans provide us with food, with hydrocarbon. The oceans moderate the global temperature. I don't know whether you know that 70% of the CO2 that we emit is absorbed by the ocean. The ocean is like a blue lung of the Earth. It absorbs carbon, it produces oxygen. The oceans are also the highways that enable international shipping to take place. Without shipping, there would be no world trade. And without world trade, there would be no Singapore. To put it simply as that. Singapore was founded by the British to serve international shipping. We are the world's second busiest port after Shanghai. I don't know whether you know that we have the world's fifth largest ship registry. And the Singapore flag is not a flag of convenience. Our flag is taken seriously by the world because we, as usual, which is our culture, take very seriously our responsibility as a flag state. And the maritime sector contributes 7% to our GDP. It employs over 150,000 people. It's a very important segment of our economy, you know? And all this would not be possible if there were not an agreed legal framework that govern the users of the sea, which enable the ships to sail with security and safety, knowing that there are rules that govern shipping. So the 10 years that I spent negotiating the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, and the last 2 years when I was elected as president of the conference, I think were not wasted years. I think the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is important to the world because it maintains peace at sea, but it's also important to us, Singaporeans. It's important to our jobs, our livelihood, our future.
Prof, with your permission, I'd like to perhaps go to something you wrote in 2009. You spoke about 5 dreams you have for Singapore, and one is that Singapore will be less obsessed with money, and that Singaporeans will grow in kindness and graciousness. Of course, always quoting Mr. Raja's warning that Singapore should not become a people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And so that's about money, and you wanted for Singapore to aspire to become the Geneva of the East and a meeting place and where adversaries can meet, you know, and talk. You wanted Singapore to be the cultural hub of Southeast Asia. You want it to be the greenest city, not just physically, but also in terms of business, investments, technology, green technology. And then you wanted us to be an important intellectual center of the world. Would you like to update your dreams?
No, I think those are good dreams, you know. And the happy news I want to share with you is that I feel that I'm a very lucky man in that so many of my dreams have been fulfilled, you know. Yeah. Can you imagine the journey we have undertaken in the last 50 years? It's unimaginable, you know. From a per capita income of maybe $500 to over $50,000. Can you imagine that? Unimaginable. When I was growing up and I was studying in America and in UK, the British pound was worth 8 Singapore dollars. We had to really be saving, you know, because we have so little money to spend. The US dollar was 3 Singapore dollars. Today, Singapore infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, are below those of the United States. I could not imagine this to be possible in my lifetime, you know. We have really made great progress. And look at our diversity. 3 European leaders a few years ago said consecutively that multiculturalism did not work. I was so offended by them, you know. And I told the 3 ambassadors in Singapore, UK, France, and Germany, I said, why don't you ask your leaders to visit Singapore? They will see that in our little country, we have one of the world's most diverse racial and religious population. And yet, harmony prevails. With the right policy and the right culture, multiculturalism can work. May I share with you my disappointment? I think we could be a kinder people. Yeah, we can be a kinder people. We are a nation of good people with good hearts. And in an emergency, this all comes up, you know. But on a day-to-day basis, we often fail ourselves in our treatment, for example, of the foreign workers. We have over 1 million foreign workers living, working for us. But they are invisible people, you know? They live their own lives. Most Singaporeans don't even acknowledge them and say good morning. We can be kinder to our foreign workers. We can be kinder to the nearly 250,000 domestic helpers. And we are not civic-minded enough. I don't know what's wrong with Singaporeans, you know? We may be rich, we may be educated, but we are not a civic-minded people, you know? We've fallen behind countries like Japan, Korea, even Taiwan, you know, where people are much more civic-minded than we are. They have internalized the rules. When people see trash on the floor, they pick it up. Here, people throw trash. Yeah, whenever I eat in a hawker center with my wife, and we do that very often, I see young people, old people refusing to pick up their bowls, their tray, and put it in, you know. Somehow, it's not in our habit and mindset. And if you look at the way we drive on our roads, I mean, I tell you, I'm going to write an essay soon on our driving man. We are one of the world's worst drivers, you know. And it's a danger to ourselves. Since F1 came to Singapore, many Singaporeans think they are Lewis Hamilton, you know. Yeah. Our driving manners are terrible. So I want to say that we're in danger of losing our environmental leadership in Asia. We are not civic-minded. We don't recycle our trash. And even when we put trash in the bins, we don't sort them out properly. We contaminate the bin for a recyclable article. So I want to say that I continue to believe in my own people. I think we are good people. But I want to appeal to the better angels of Singaporeans that we can be better. We can be kinder, more civic-minded, more environment and nature loving.
So, Prof, you have identified the symptoms of the ugly Singaporean, but really, what do you think are the root causes, and what do you think we can do about it? Of course, we each have to exercise our circles of influence and do our part, but really, what do you suggest we can do as a nation about this?
I think it must start from young. We have to somehow inculcate in our young people a different set of values. So many of our middle class and upper middle class kids are growing up pampered, you know. They've never done anything for themselves. They deliberately throw things down, expecting the domestic helper to pick them up. I think it's a good thing that MOE recently said all Singapore schools are going to copy a good tradition of the Chinese school. You clean your own school. We want all our kids to learn that you must keep your environment clean, that you have a responsibility to keep it clean, not to outsource it to a domestic helper or somebody else, but yourself. I think we can be kinder and not feel that to be kind is somehow to be weak, you know. We are a very macho society, you know, right? In Singapore, people think that to be strong is to be macho, to be unsentimental. But hey, you can be strong and kind. I don't think those are contradictory qualities. I really believe that it is, you know, it has to be both a bottom-up and a top-down process. We can change our values, our attitudes, our ethos. We need to start below, but we also need to start at the top. Gone are the days when the Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew actually carried a broomstick and swept the streets of Singapore, you know? Maybe we should do that again. It is both teaching our young people the right values, but it is also our leaders setting an example.